Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. If you're new here, this is about my third video, and today I'm going to talk about my 10-gram experience of doing psychedelic mushrooms. Well, I suppose I should start from the beginning. I decided to do this when I was 17 or 18 years old, and really searching, as many kids do at this age, for some type of stereotypical psychedelic experience. Many of us grow up hearing about psychedelics, many of us see them in cinema, and many of us just hear wild stories from friends and siblings and things like that. And I was another product of that exact environment. And so I was very curious. My curiosity turned into action my junior year of high school when I started seeking these out. And so for some people, they're extremely abundant in their area, depending on a certain person who's distributing them. For some people, they are gold to find. And I was in a situation where maybe for social reasons, for abundancy reasons, it was like gold to me, and I could not find a good source of these mushrooms. So I finally found one my senior or junior year of high school. I actually cannot exactly recall. And so I had researched naively into ego death, the experience of just complete dissolution of any sense of self or anything like that, and I found that extremely interesting. And I also found many of the other experiences described on psychedelic forums such as Arrowhead and things like that extremely interesting. And I also disregarded many of the advisories warning people to not jump in too deep right away, but I decided to jump in too deep, and I bought 10 grams. And so I have here some writing that I wrote down about an hour ago to put into a linear fashion the series of things that happened to me when I decided to do this. And so let's talk about where I decided to do them. It was roughly a peninsula, if you can imagine that, but it had a river on the sides of it instead. And so I had the opportunity to have a small park area in the middle that was very rarely occupied. I'm from a very small town, and a beach area as well. So I decided that I would send myself on somewhat of a spirit quest alone in this area, and I would withdraw tons of meaning from this experience. I would essentially go on some type of a self-induced spirit walk or spirit journey, if that's any type of real thing. And so I have here some of the precautions that I took, if you can call them precautions at all, and I would recommend you absolutely have somebody with you if you ever decide to do this for yourself, but I did not. What I did instead was tell my girlfriend at the time, who was at work from, let's say, I believe maybe 11 a.m. to 5 p.m., to get a text from me, and when she gets that text, to start a timer. And after that timer has hit roughly 5 hours, she would come pick me up from this area if I have not responded, because I was aware, at least conceptually, of the things that could happen if I went very deep on this experience. And thank God I did that, and you're going to hear why. And so I went to the spot alone, and I brought headphones. And this is one of the naive things I think a lot of people do before they have their first, or I don't know, maybe some people actually do enjoy headphones. But let me just say that a big sign that you don't understand that you're about to do a high dose of mushrooms is that you brought headphones at all. Because when the experience begins, the conceptualization of a headphone is gone more than it's not even worth bringing in the first place. You might as well have brought a brick. And so here I'm organizing myself a bit because I tend to jump all over the place. I sit down in an isolated area. There's nobody in this area at the time. I basically have a playground for a mushroom trip. And so I ingest these mushrooms. They're disgusting. Maybe some people have a developed taste to them. I've done them probably 10 times total. I don't. I find it absolutely revolting. I gagged it down. And actually, I can recall exactly what the orientation was of the mushrooms in the bag. They were pale white and bruised blue. And most of the weight I remember because I weighed it out for myself afterwards, taking some precautions, you see. I remember one of the mushrooms was 5 grams, five grams and some change. And so a lot of that eating period, the ingesting period, where I had reached a calm area outdoors by a river, at a bench where I could sit with a table, I was choking down a 5-gram, extremely large white mushroom and all its cousins, and it was horrendous. But this was a means to an end for me. I wanted to achieve some type of spiritual experience. I thought. And so My goal going into this, I jotted down, I remember, was essentially to extract as much value as I could from it. I thought that maybe at the current point in life I was at a kind of dividing, a place where paths divide. I was about to go to university and focus on a specialization and really try to develop one domain that I was interested in. And so I naively thought that I could manipulate this hallucinogenic experience to shape my sense of direction in life, or shape, or maybe show me what I find meaningful and things of that nature. The real mistake here isn't thinking that those things can happen. The real mistake was thinking that I could interrogate this experience from the mushrooms. If any of those insights come to you, they will be coming outwardly in, not from you using some type of tool. All right, so I have here a timeline of the effects, and I think that would serve because otherwise I'm just going to jump all over the place. So, the first thing I extremely remember was the powerful wave of nausea. Now, I've had only smaller mushroom trips since then, but all of them have been arguably the same or less nausea. So I find it or more nausea, I mean. And so I find it interesting that 10 grams of eating this material seem to not make me as nauseous as other smaller doses have. So perhaps this says something about different types of mushrooms. And so I remember a feeling of extreme regret. I was sitting at if you can imagine, just a table, picture a desk, anything, and I had my head on my hands like this, and I just started realizing what I had done. The nauseous feeling was beginning. I think maybe the precursors to a hallucinogenic experience were occurring, and I was regretting it because it wasn't feeling good, and I knew that I had just buckled myself up into a rocket ship, and I maybe didn't have a license to be an astronaut, if you're catching me. And so the next thing I remember, if I can remember as much as I can of these smaller details of this very powerful experience, maybe 20 minutes passed, but at this point, you really can't start measuring time. This is kind of when time goes off the clock. So let's say 25 minutes. I stand up and I start walking around my immediate grassy area that the bench surrounds. And still, there's nobody near me. Only the occasional jogger may come by, and even that has not happened yet. And so I'm walking around, and that is when I begin to notice that I'm absolutely beginning to have powerful effects. And those effects were most prominent in the visual field. When I started walking, I was experiencing extreme visual distortions of depth in the area that I was walking. So I was looking at the ground while walking, and yet the ground seemed to be rising towards me and also falling away. Extremely unsettling feeling. Also, I really recall this, and if anybody ever sees this, please let me know if this happened to you as well. A light purple tinge occurred as well to my vision. I don't know what could possibly be the cause of that. It didn't feel like a hallucinogenic type of, like a projection. It felt like actually my visual field had become light purple, almost like if you imagine looking at the sun for a while and then your vision being stained. And so I have here that during the walking, I became extremely immersed in the trip. I remember time starting to slip away. All sense of any type of ego is beginning to slip away, and that's most noticeable, I think, in the fact that you shed your layers of caring. And that happened to me by completely, it was the difference between going to an experience and trying to begin one when I first arrived there, and then actually being immersed in an experience that I had no control over. It's similar if you just suddenly became very drunk, but much, much more powerful. And so any intent I had at this point was gone. Any goal that I had going into it, and my backpack that I had brought, all these things were gone, and I was like a child again. I was playfully re-experiencing all these senses and the things around me, and just I won't bother trying to explain the experiential feeling you have in your head, because I really think maybe that varies, and also what's the likelihood that I can convey it in words. But it is something that you will understand if you ever decide to do these. And so a profound euphoria begins, and that euphoria is easily the most powerful euphoria that I've ever felt. And I was a kid who grew up taking prescription stimulants because I was too hyper. And I'm very familiar with the effect of stimulants on euphoria. And let me just say that that the euphoric effect that I had from this size of a trip, and let me remind you, my first trip was profound. It was easily a religious experience. I was immediately engrossed in a completely different narrative going on in my head. I was on a path and a track doing things that I did not know what was going to happen next, but it all felt absolutely right and absolutely important and good. And so I write here that I was absolutely free of shame and absolutely bursting with curiosity. That's one of the very interesting things. It was as if you just understood that you were perceiving things at one resolution, and then now you could scale it up at any moment you want. And it was like finding out all the things that you've missed out on. And so this video, I don't think, will surprise anybody who has done these types of things, but if you haven't, you may find that interesting. And so I remember feeling the next major step was the extreme need to sit down or lay down, and that feeling almost as if you're being pulled down towards the ground. It's a real sensation. Your knees are weak, your stomach feels light. You're not strong. If you felt strong before, you don't feel strong now, and it almost felt like a call to surrender to the experience. And so as I'm saying these things, just know that I'm trying to word it in the best way that I can word it, but know that I had an intense need to lay down and just be close to the earth in all parts of my body. And so I make my way to a sandy, isolated beach area, you could say, somewhat by the water. And still, there's nobody near me. I did it on a noon, I guess, where no one decided in my small town to be in that area. And so I begin laying down in the sand, and this is where I can recall the most. And what happened was I laid down in the sand and I fully immersed myself. My hands fully went into the sand. I started essentially probably burying myself. And at this point, time is completely gone. I'm just reconnecting with this lowest level of earth that I can reconnect. And I really, really remember just hitting my chest and just saying ape, like just understanding that I was no different than anything around me. And I was the lowest form of being, just like all these other things were. And I should never have even thought that I stood out from the rest of the scenery around me in the first place. And so that's a really funny thing. And also at this moment, I began being very stuck in a loop. And so this is another thing that is very common during mushroom trips, is to get stuck in a loop. And so I think my loop was basically, it probably would have seemed terrifying. Luckily, nobody saw it. Just me laying down on the beach, being flat on my back, and then rising, somewhat pacing around that small area, thinking sporadically about very interesting ideas to me, but certainly incomprehensible ones, and walking just back and forth, just very, very could not stop repeating the same thing that I was doing, all while my thoughts were also somewhat looping. It wasn't a negative experience, but it was very, very strange. And so at that moment, let's see, yep, that's what I thought. The next thing that I remember the most was just a very strong primal urge. And I don't know how you can explain that other than what it means to me. And what it meant to me was that all the layers that I was wearing just felt completely superfluous. They felt unimportant and also false. They felt like lies. They felt like they felt like a costume, really. The best way to put it is a costume. And I did not get naked, but I did I think I probably rolled my sleeves up or something like that. I tried to just expose as much of my skin in a non. I wasn't naked. I promise. I didn't get down into my underwear, but I really realized that. I can't say I realized, but under that, in that moment, I felt as if all of us were apes wearing costumes, and I felt that deeply, and I could not respect any institutional system that was organized around wearing a costume. And so I remember a tangent line of my thinking, just if I had seen any type of authority figure at that particular moment in my trip, I just would not have been able to respect them. And so I actually did happen to see across the riverbank while I laid in the sand. I saw two police. who were not paying me any mind, or for what I could tell, anybody else any mind, but they were on a path across the river, and they were just walking, maybe doing some type of regular patrol. And I remember just looking at them wide-eyed and just marveling that I'm afraid of these apes who wear these black costumes, who if they found out that I'm doing the peaceful thing I was doing on the beach right there, they would take my ape self and they would put me in a metal cage, and then I wouldn't be able to get out. And then at that institution, other people would have to wear costumes, and I would have to wear a new costume that changed my value. And so, like, I was stuck in that line of thinking that everything originated from this idea that we were important because of costumes that we wore. And so that was a certainly dangerous way of thinking, and why you should not do these alone at all. And let's see what else we have. I talked about how I beat my chest. I talked about how powerfully primal I felt. I remember extreme contempt for my ego. I remember thinking, wow, I was so arrogant to think that I could take this amount and have some type of controlled experience, as if I was a superhero who could channel this extreme power. And I could not. I was at the mercy of this experience and what it wanted to show me. And at one point, I guess one of the most significant hallucinations was, and none of these, I still to this day have not had any type of significant visual hallucinations, as people sometimes say. Some people have seen figures and things like. I've never seen any type of actual apparition or anything like that. I've only had very powerful feelings of connection with other things around me, and as if maybe I could let's just be honest, like, you could hear the thoughts of a tree maybe. And I want to be clear, I don't believe that I think that I could do that today, or that was ever happening, but at that moment it felt as if I was intercommunicating with a tree, and maybe the tree was a medium for some other type of essence or spirit. And so I remember being taken on some type of a tour of small, I guess you could say small, like, let's say ferns, small weeds that were growing, but they were growing very even in rows. And I was walking through those rows, and I was being told by myself, really, I suppose, that I was seriously no more important than any of these other pupils at that time. Just these individual plants that were growing, that were small and would probably be washed away and destroyed, and were never even going to matter to any side passing person. Uh, I was the same. Like, I had the exact same value as all the other students in the class. And I think that was a valuable thing to feel at that moment, because I believed it, because I believed everything I was being told. And that is something that I should probably refine down and say that it does, for me, I'm only speaking about my experience, it did feel like intercommunication with some type of soul entity, not soul soul, but one entity. And so I don't know what to make of that. I don't think that that occurred. I say that because I'm trying to be rational, but I can't shake the intimation that I had a long conversation with essentially a tree, or some type of proxy for the spirit of nature. And so I want to make sure I get everything in here. Oh, one of the frightening things, and one of the reasons that you really should not do this alone, is that as I was returning from the beach area up a trail, still very intoxicated under the influence of this substance, my first person I ran into came by, and that person was walking two. I remember them as pit bulls, but maybe they weren't pit bulls. I'm not a dog breeder, but they were very large, and I suppose he had just released them as they were coming onto the beach, and they sprinted towards the water, which is where I was coming from. And so, from my perspective, I went from this extremely peaceful, hey, I was just on a tour with Mother Nature. Hey, I was just in her classroom, and she was instructing me. And now there are two barking, I swear, man, they were barking, big dogs running towards me. And I would be lying if I reconjured all the things I could remember at that moment, but I was extremely afraid. And because I also didn't see the owner, because I suppose he had let them go further ahead, further behind. And so I guess to just get to the end of that, they ran right past me as if it was some type of cinematic cinematic event. And so I passed him. This man must have thought that I was on some type of very hard substance, but I was trying to be just calm and relaxed, because I just had no bad will for anybody. I was on this I was on this spirit walk that I thought I was going to control, but had taken a completely different turn. And so I hope I mentioned at the beginning of this video that I had told my girlfriend to set a 5-hour timer. And so during this time, I had no conception of time. And so as I came back up from the beach, a car speeds to the parking lot area near where we're from. And it's my girlfriend's car, I can tell you now, but I actually didn't even realize that at the time. She gets out, she runs towards me, and she goes, "Are you okay? Like, what's going on?" And so now you can picture me now because I know what I was like. So I was covered in sand, just my face, my arms, everything. I probably had my sleeves rolled up. I wanted to be barefoot. Maybe I was barefoot, but I don't think I was because I wouldn't have been carrying my shoes. And I did not know my own name. And my girlfriend found me and she said, "It's been 5 hours. You never texted me at all." I had never sent, luckily my phone had stayed. I actually can't tell you that my phone stayed in my pocket. It either stayed in my pocket or stayed with my backpack at the table that I was at. But I had not looked at my phone for 5 hours, and it felt like no time to me, maybe 1 to 2 hours. And so luckily I'm found by my girlfriend who is basically trying to get me home. And I didn't understand home. I didn't understand the conception of my car. I didn't understand that money was none of it mattered. I really was trying to go completely back to basics. And that's a very bad state to be in if someone else is not around you. So I easily can say that I probably would have given somebody my car. I easily, like if they needed a ride, or they would have said something foolish to me, I really would have not cared because I would have figured that I would just walk everywhere after that because everything seemed superfluous after all, and there was nothing more important than just the ape that I was. And so I'm even having memories of it as I say it. And so I hope I didn't leave any big details out, and I hope I explained anything at all. But that is my first time I've ever done mushrooms and my first 10-gram mushroom trip, and that's what happened. So thanks for watching. If you watch this and you're not me rewatching this, think about subscribing. Maybe you'll be my first subscriber, maybe you'll be my second. All right, have a good day.